Young Maid lost everything when her ex left, only to marry a rich millionaire. And then Emily Clark sat in her small, cluttered apartment in New York City, a cup of half-drunk coffee in her hand, staring out at the rain trickling down the window. The city's hum felt distant, far removed from the chaos swirling inside her. Her phone blinked with a reminder of dinner plans with Tom, the same plans they'd had for months. But now a deep unease settled in her chest. The weight of their earlier conversation lingered, suffocating her. The day had started like any other. Emily, a young woman with ambition, had spent the morning working on marketing proposals at her tech startup. The city's fast pace had always energized her, but it was Tom who had been her constant, her rock for the last 3 years. They had their ups and downs, but their bond had felt unbreakable. When Tom texted her to meet, she didn't think much of it. Their routine was familiar. But as she walked into the cafe, she noticed the coldness in his eyes, the distance between them that was suddenly palpable. "Hey," she greeted, trying to bridge the gap. "Hi, Em," Tom said, his voice lacking warmth. They sat in silence as Emily's heart began to race. Something was wrong. Tom shifted uncomfortably, his gaze avoiding hers. After a tense pause, he finally spoke. "Em, I think we should break up," he said, his words feeling foreign to him. The shock hit like a punch to the gut. Emily couldn't process it. How could this be happening? "I've met someone else," Tom continued, unable to meet her eyes. "Someone who makes me feel like I have a future again." The words pierced her heart. He was leaving her for someone else. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way it came so easily to him, while Emily was still reeling. Tom apologized softly, but his words only felt like empty echoes. Emily was paralyzed, unable to respond, her mind spinning with anger, sadness and confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you just throw away everything we had?" Tom said his final apology before leaving Emily alone in the cafe. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty chair across from her, her mind clouded with disbelief. Later that night, the city felt foreign. The lights of the skyscrapers blurred, and the sounds of traffic faded into the background as Emily walked home, lost in her thoughts. When she reached her apartment, she collapsed onto her bed, wrapping herself in the covers, but the emptiness in her chest remained. In the silence of her room, Emily cried for the future that was now gone, for the love she had thought was real, now shattered. She cried because she felt lost in a city that no longer felt like home. For the first time in years, Emily didn't know who she was anymore. The weeks after Tom's departure felt like an eternity to Emily, yet they passed in a blur. In the quiet hours of the morning, when the city was still waking up, she would lie in bed and replay the final conversation with Tom, trying to make sense of the wreckage he had left behind. But the ache was persistent, like a dull hum beneath her skin. Despite the numbness, Emily knew she couldn't stay in this place forever. She had to move, she had to heal. But how? At first, she tried to distract herself, but it wasn't enough. She needed something more. She needed to prove to herself that she wasn't defined by the end of her relationship. So Emily threw herself into her career, diving headfirst into work. It was a way to shut out the lingering pain, to bury the questions that had no answers. She focused on the details of her marketing projects with obsessive determination. Every email, every presentation, every client meeting became a way for her to rebuild her sense of self. If she couldn't control her personal life, she would pour every ounce of energy into what she could control, her career. She wasn't prepared for the sudden call that came one chilly afternoon in early November. Emily had barely finished a long day of brainstorming and had started packing her things when her phone rang. The number on the screen wasn't familiar, but the voice on the other end was. It was the HR manager from one of the most prestigious marketing firms in New York City, the one Emily had applied to months ago, before Tom's departure. They had reviewed her resume and portfolio, and after several interviews, they had decided to offer her the position of senior marketing strategist. The offer was generous, more than she had ever imagined. It was the kind of opportunity that made the world feel just a little bit bigger, a little bit brighter. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point she had been waiting for. "I'll take it," Emily said with a steady voice, the weight of her words sinking in. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjusting to the new job, familiarizing herself with high-profile clients, and attending team meetings with people who were smarter, faster, and more accomplished than she had ever been. But Emily wasn't intimidated, she was invigorated. She worked late nights and long weekends, determined to prove herself. She could feel the reputation she was building, one as a dedicated, hard-working woman who wouldn't back down from any challenge. Her days were filled with deadlines and strategy sessions, her nights a quiet reprieve from the demands of the corporate world. But something had changed inside her. As she climbed the ladder of success, she realized that her identity wasn't just tied to her career. It was something much deeper. Work no longer felt like an escape. It was a reflection of her strength, of her ability to rise above the pain, and of her capacity to move forward. Yet, even in the midst of her professional success, there was still a lingering emptiness. Emily had closed off parts of herself, especially when it came to personal connections. She hadn't been out with friends in months, and she knew she couldn't keep ignoring the relationships that had once mattered so much to her. It was time to reconnect with the people who had always been there for her. One evening, after an exhausting day at the office, Emily found herself scrolling through her contacts, stopping when her eyes landed on Sarah Davis' name. Sarah had been Emily's best friend during childhood. They had spent summers together in their small hometown, running through fields, dreaming of far-off futures. They had shared their first secrets and first crushes, their first heartaches. But after Emily moved to New York, they had lost touch. Life had taken them in different directions. Sarah had built a successful business empire, an online clothing boutique that had grown into a multi-million-dollar brand. Emily admired Sarah's drive, but she'd always felt a little intimidated by her friend's achievements. But now, after everything that had happened with Tom, Emily realized she needed Sarah. She needed someone who understood her, who had known her before New York, before Heartbreak, before the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. Sarah answered the phone with her signature warmth, a laugh in her voice as she picked up. It's been ages. What's going on with you?" It was a relief to hear Sarah's voice, so familiar and comforting, like a safe harbor in the storm of her life. "I've been busy," Emily said, trying to keep the conversation light. "I think it's time we catch up." A few days later, Emily found herself sitting across from Sarah at a cozy bistro in Greenwich Village, a place where they had once shared endless cups of coffee and talked about their futures. Sarah looked the same as she always had, effortlessly beautiful, with a sharp business mind and a confident presence. But there was something different in the way she spoke now, a depth to her that came from years of hard work and success. "I've missed you, Em," Sarah said, her tone sincere. "You've always been the one I could count on for real talk. How are you doing?" Emily hesitated. She could feel the walls she had carefully built around herself start to crumble, but she wasn't ready to break down just yet. "I'm better. I'm working a lot. It helps. I guess I'm still figuring things out." Sarah nodded, her eyes softening with understanding. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now, but you do have to start living again. You can't keep burying yourself in work, Emily. You have to reconnect with the parts of you that make you feel again." Her words hit Emily like a wave. Sarah was right. Emily had been so focused on rebuilding her life, she had forgotten the most important thing of all, to live, to experience life, to embrace the joy and the pain, the ups and the downs. Sarah, always the fearless one, was reminding her of what she had left behind in her pursuit of success. "That's what I've been telling you," Sarah continued. "You need to start putting yourself out there again, finding joy in the little things, and maybe meeting new people. You never know who might come along." The suggestion made Emily uneasy. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of change yet, but she knew that Sarah's words were true. Emily couldn't live in the shadow of the past forever. A few weeks later, an unexpected invitation arrived in her inbox. A charity gala for one of the city's most prominent non-profits. Emily hadn't thought much about social events lately, but something about the idea of giving back and perhaps even meeting new people sparked a flicker of interest. Maybe it was time to step outside her comfort zone. The evening of the gala, Emily wore a sleek black dress, her hair swept into a soft updo. She felt a flutter of nerves as she entered the grand ballroom filled with well-dressed New Yorkers, all talking, laughing and mingling. It was elegant, but it also felt overwhelming. Emily had never quite gotten used to these events, but Sarah had convinced her that it was time. As she scanned the room, a familiar face caught her attention. A man stood by the bar, his profile strikingly handsome, with dark hair and a commanding presence. He was older than Emily, perhaps in his early 40s, but there was something about the way he carried himself that exuded confidence without arrogance. He was talking to a group of people, but when his eyes met hers across the room, something passed between them, an unspoken recognition. Before she knew it, the man approached her with a warm smile, extending his hand. "James Bennett," he introduced himself, his voice smooth but genuine. "I don't believe we've met. You're Emily, right?" Emily was taken aback by the sudden attention, but smiled in return, shaking his hand. "Yes, Emily Clark. It's nice to meet you." They fell into easy conversation, discussing everything from the latest trends in marketing to their mutual appreciation for the city's unique energy. James was intrigued by Emily's wit and intelligence. She wasn't just another pretty face at the gala, she was sharp, insightful and kind. And as they talked, Emily felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. A connection. Not a romantic one, at least not yet, but something deeper, something that had the potential to grow into something more. As the night drew to a close, James asked if she would like to join him for a coffee sometime. Emily hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, a chance to rediscover herself, to explore the possibilities life still had to offer. And just like that, Emily realized that the pieces were starting to come together. The days that followed Emily's encounter with James Bennett were a blur of excitement, anticipation, and quiet uncertainty. Their coffee date, a simple gesture that had seemed so casual at the time, marked the beginning of something unexpected. The chemistry between them had been immediate, palpable, like two pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. But what made it all the more thrilling and terrifying was how easily it seemed to happen. There were no pretensions, no games, just two people connecting in the most genuine way. James was different from anyone Emily had ever met. He was wealthy, yes, but there was an ease about him that didn't feel like the typical power play. His success in the real estate world had earned him respect, but it was his generosity, his warmth, that captivated Emily. He was open, kind, and above all, genuine. In his presence, Emily didn't feel like just another person in a crowd. She felt seen. She felt important. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing at all. Emily was drawn to James's sharp intellect, the way he spoke about his business ventures with such passion, but it wasn't just his mind that intrigued her. It was the way he listened to her, how he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. Unlike so many people she had encountered, James didn't just see her as a face in a crowd. He saw her for who she truly was, an ambitious, strong woman with dreams that reached far beyond the confines of her current life. But as their relationship deepened, so did Emily's uncertainty. She couldn't help but question whether someone like James, someone so successful, so put together, could truly see her for who she was, flaws and all. She wasn't the woman she had once been. The woman who was confident in her love with Tom, the woman who believed in forever. No, she was someone else now, someone who had been torn apart, who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. She was still healing, still learning to trust herself, and every time she looked at James, she couldn't help but wonder if he could ever truly accept her as she was. When they went out together, Emily was acutely aware of the world around them. They attended upscale dinners, charity galas, and private events, places where Emily felt somewhat out of place, despite how welcome James made her feel. She would catch herself thinking, "Does he really see me? Does he know the pieces I'm still putting back together?" His life was one of luxury and power, and though he never made her feel small or unworthy, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider, a temporary guest in a world that was foreign to her. But when they were alone, when it was just the two of them, things felt different. In the quiet of his apartment, the simple act of making dinner together, the soft hum of their voices as they exchanged stories and laughter, it all felt so real. There, in those moments of intimacy, Emily felt like she belonged. James never pushed her. He never asked her to be someone she wasn't. He accepted her vulnerability with a grace that both comforted and confused her. And yet, despite the undeniable chemistry and connection they shared, a constant thread of doubt wove its way through her thoughts. Do I deserve him? She would lie awake at night, the question echoing in her mind, twisting her insides. Does someone like me, someone who's been broken, truly deserve a man like James, someone who could have anyone? She had always been the one who gave, the one who loved fully, wholeheartedly. But now, after everything with Tom, after the betrayal, the pain, she felt like a shell of who she once was. The cracks were still there. Would James see them? Would he accept them? One evening, as she walked through Central Park with James after dinner, the warmth of his hand in hers felt like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The leaves were turning a brilliant shade of red and gold, the autumn air crisp with the promise of change. James was talking about a new project he was working on, but Emily was only half listening. Her mind was elsewhere. The weight of her thoughts seemed to press against her, threatening to drown out the peaceful quiet between them. "Em?" James's voice broke through her reverie. "You've been quiet tonight. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her heart racing. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to be honest with him about the insecurity gnawing at her, but how could she say it? How could she admit to him that she wasn't sure if she deserved the life he was offering her? The life of stability, of love, of trust. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm just figuring things out. It's all moving so fast, you know." James stopped walking, gently turning her toward him. His eyes, deep and searching, fixed on her with such intensity that Emily felt exposed, like he could see every corner of her soul. "Emily," he said softly, "I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I just want to be here with you, whatever that looks like." The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter, and yet the doubt didn't fade. It lingered, like a shadow just out of reach. That very same night, Emily's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The name that appeared on the screen made her stomach drop. It was Tom. "Can we talk? I made a huge mistake. I need you to know that I'm not happy without you. I'm not complete without you, Em. Please, let's talk." Her fingers hovered over the screen, her breath caught in her throat. She had thought about him, of course. She had tried not to, but the memories of their life together, their shared moments, still haunted her at night. Had he really changed? Could he really be sincere? It was the phone call she had been dreading. The one that came when she was beginning to heal, when she was starting to open her heart again. James. Tom, the past, the future. Emily felt torn, like a tug of war was happening inside her, with both men pulling her in opposite directions. Tom had been her first love, the man she thought she would spend her life with. But James made her feel alive in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. He saw her for who she was now, not for who she used to be. He accepted her flaws, her scars, and all the messy pieces that made her who she was. But how could she let go of Tom? How could she trust herself enough to choose the future with someone new when her heart still carried so much baggage from the past? The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. Emily spent hours alone in her apartment, pacing, thinking, writing in her journal. She needed to sort through this, to make sense of her feelings, and yet, each time she picked up her phone to call Tom, her fingers would freeze. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to go back to someone who had left her when she needed him the most. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, as Emily sat in a cafe nursing a cup of tea, the decision finally came to her. It wasn't easy. It wasn't sudden. But she knew deep down that she had to move forward. She deserved to be with someone who saw her potential, who recognized her worth, not as a consolation prize, but as the whole, powerful woman she was becoming. With trembling hands, Emily sent a message to Tom. "I think it's time we both move on. I've already given you my heart once, and I can't keep holding on to the past. I'm sorry." She pressed send, and as the weight of her decision lifted, Emily realized she was ready. Ready for a future that wasn't weighed down by the past. Ready for the person who truly saw her not as a shadow of her former self, but as the woman she was meant to be. The road ahead was uncertain, but Emily knew one thing for sure: she was ready to embrace it. And as she walked out into the rainy afternoon, her heart lighter than it had been in months, she found herself thinking of James. And this time, when she thought of him, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. The first few months of Emily and James's relationship felt like an unspoken agreement between them, a quiet understanding that they were exactly what the other needed. Their connection had deepened quickly, and Emily felt more alive than she had in years. James had become her confidant, her safe space, the person who made her believe in the possibility of love again. In his eyes, she saw a future that was no longer clouded by the bitterness of her past. But as with all relationships, the gloss of new love eventually began to fade, revealing cracks that had previously been hidden. Emily had noticed the occasional oddity in James's behavior, moments when he seemed distant, distracted. He would often retreat into himself when the topic of his past came up, deflecting with vague answers or changing the subject entirely. Emily didn't press him, respecting his privacy, but the nagging feeling of unease began to grow. One evening, as they sat in a quiet restaurant on the Upper West Side, Emily noticed the tension in James's demeanor. His usual charm and easygoing nature were gone, replaced by a palpable discomfort. He'd been distant all night, his responses curt, his mind clearly elsewhere. She couldn't ignore it any longer. "James," she said, her voice soft yet firm, "what's going on? You've been quiet lately." "I can feel it." "I thought we were past the point of secrets." James's eyes darkened at her words, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His jaw tightened as he set his fork down and leaned back, his gaze not meeting hers. For the first time, Emily felt a chill between them, a distance that she couldn't bridge with a mere touch. I've been thinking about this," James began, his voice low, almost regretful. "There's something I need to tell you, something about my past. I've tried to keep it from you because I don't want to hurt you, but I can't keep it hidden forever." Emily's heart began to race. She could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. She braced herself, not sure if she was prepared for whatever was coming next. "I wasn't always who you think I am," James continued, his words coming slowly, as if they were dragging themselves from a place deep within him. "I was involved in a scandal a few years ago. It almost ruined my career, my reputation. I made some decisions, bad decisions. I was reckless. I took risks that, in hindsight, were incredibly foolish. Some of my wealth, it's tied to deals that weren't exactly above board." The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. Her hand instinctively gripped the edge of the table, her pulse quickening. She had always known that James's success had come with a certain level of mystery, but she had never imagined it would be something like this. The man she had come to love, the man who seemed to embody integrity, was tangled in a web of shady business dealings. You're saying your wealth isn't all legitimate?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear more, but something inside her told her she had to. James nodded, his eyes not meeting hers. "I didn't want to be that person anymore." I'm not proud of it. I've worked hard to distance myself from that side of my life. But the damage, it's there. It's a part of me, and I've tried to be better. I've tried to make things right. Emily sat frozen, the weight of his revelation sinking in. Her mind raced as she processed his words. Everything she thought she knew about James, about their relationship, felt like it was unraveling in front of her. This wasn't just about bad business decisions, it was about trust, about integrity. She had built this image of him in her mind, a man who was kind, honorable, someone who had overcome his past. But now it seemed like the foundation of their relationship was built on a lie. "How am I supposed to believe you, James?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "How do I know that you've really changed, that you're not still that person?" "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I've spent the last few years working on myself. I've severed ties with people who encouraged my past behavior. I've made amends where I could. I don't want to go back to who I was. I want to build a future with you, Emily. A real one. But I can't keep hiding from this anymore. I need you to know the truth." Emily could hear the sincerity in his voice, but doubt and fear clawed at her. She had been hurt before. Could she trust him? Was he truly the man he claimed to be now? Or was this just another layer of deceit, another hidden part of his life that she didn't know about? She had already been vulnerable with him, already let herself fall, and now she was faced with the uncomfortable reality that the man she loved wasn't as perfect as she had imagined. The silence between them was deafening as Emily searched his face, looking for some sign, some glimmer of the man she had come to adore. But all she could see was uncertainty. She could hear the honesty in his words, but her heart was still in turmoil. She had always believed that love should be pure, without secrets, without hidden agendas. But now she was forced to confront the messiness of real life, the imperfections that everyone carried, the mistakes that couldn't be erased. "Emily," James said softly, reaching for her hand, "I know I've made mistakes, but I can't change the past. All I can do is show you who I am now and who I want to be, but I can't do that if you don't trust me." Emily withdrew her hand slowly, the weight of his plea hanging in the air between them. She wasn't sure what to say. Her mind was clouded with a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who seemed so perfect, was flawed, deeply flawed, and she didn't know if she could accept that. That night, after their conversation ended in silence, Emily lay awake in her bed, the darkness pressing in around her. She felt torn between the love she had for James and the fear that his past would always shadow their relationship. Could she look past his mistakes? Could she love a man who had once made decisions that could have ruined everything? The days that followed were no easier. Every time she looked at James, the weight of his secret lingered in the air. They went on with their routine, shared dinners and laughter, but the underlying tension between them remained. Emily found herself retreating inward, questioning everything about their relationship. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to trust that he had truly changed. But how could she be sure? As the weeks passed, Emily came to a realization. True love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about finding someone who had no past, no mistakes. It was about growth. It was about accepting someone for who they were and who they had become. James had shown her his vulnerability, his flaws, and now it was up to her to decide if she could accept him as he was, scars and all. But it wasn't just about James. Emily had to confront her own fears, the fear of being hurt again, the fear of trusting someone completely, the fear of being vulnerable. She had spent so much of her life protecting herself, guarding her heart. But maybe, just maybe, true love was about taking that leap of faith, even when it was hard, even when it meant facing the unknown. And so, as Emily stood on the precipice of her decision, she realized that the most important thing wasn't whether James's past had been perfect, but whether they could build something real together. Could she accept him as he was, imperfections and all? Could she trust him to be the man he promised to be? The answer, she realized, lay in her own heart, in her ability to forgive, to move forward, and to love without conditions. Because in the end, love wasn't about finding someone who was perfect. It was about finding someone who was willing to grow, to learn, and to be better together. It had been months since Emily had come to terms with James's past, since she had finally accepted that the man standing before her now was someone who had worked hard to leave that past behind. It hadn't been an easy journey. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, but Emily had learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone with whom you could grow, someone who could look at you with understanding, with patience, and with the courage to face even the darkest parts of themselves. James had done that, and in turn, Emily had done the same. Their relationship had deepened to a place that felt like home, a place of trust and acceptance. There were no more secrets, no more walls between them. They had become partners in every sense of the word, building a life together, sharing dreams, fears, and moments of pure, unfiltered joy. Emily could feel it in her bones. This was where she was meant to be. She had found the love she had been looking for, not in someone perfect, but in someone real. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of James's penthouse, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting the city in a golden hue, James turned to her with a look of intense emotion. The air between them seemed to still, as if the world had momentarily paused just for them. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but thick with meaning, "you've changed my life in ways I can't even describe. I've made my share of mistakes, but every day with you has shown me what real love looks like. You've stood by me through everything, the good, the bad, the parts of me that I wasn't proud of. And for that, I'm more grateful than I can say. I know I'm not perfect, but I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much you mean to me. I want to build a future with you." His words hung in the air, weighty with sincerity, and Emily felt her heart leap in her chest. She had never been one to expect grand gestures, but in that moment, with the city lights twinkling below them, she realized that this was exactly what she had been waiting for. Not perfection, but the kind of love that was built on trust, resilience, and a deep commitment to one another. "James," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't need perfection. I don't need a fairy tale. I just need you. I've come to realize that love isn't about escaping the past. It's about embracing the present and looking toward the future together." James smiled, the weight of his proposal lifting from his shoulders as if a burden had been released. "So what do you say?" he asked, his eyes soft but filled with hope. In that moment, Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, everything else faded into the background. They were there, together, their hands entwined, their hearts aligned. This was it, the next chapter, the one where they would face everything together. There would be challenges, no doubt. But as long as they were side by side, Emily knew they could overcome anything. But as quickly as their joy had taken root, the ground beneath them began to shift. It was only a few weeks after their engagement when the storm clouds began to gather. The financial markets were volatile, and James's company, despite its recent successes, had been heavily invested in a number of high-risk ventures. The delicate balance between profit and loss had tipped in the wrong direction. What had started as a small ripple soon became a tidal wave, and before long, James was facing a full-blown crisis. The media picked up on the news, and the scandal resurfaced. The same financial dealings that had once threatened to ruin James's career were now under scrutiny again. The past that Emily had come to terms with was now threatening to pull them back into its shadow. The company's stocks plummeted, and James's reputation was once again questioned. News outlets had a field day, running stories that painted him as reckless, irresponsible, a man who had failed to learn from his mistakes. Emily felt the weight of it all, the pressure mounting not just on James, but on their relationship as well. They had just begun to build something beautiful, something strong, but now it seemed as though everything was crumbling. She watched James, who had always been calm and composed, now retreating into himself. The confident man she knew was gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost, unsure of what to do next. At night, when they sat together in the dim light of their apartment, the silence between them was suffocating. James would stare out of the window, his face set in a hard, unreadable expression. Emily could see the weight of his burdens pressing down on him, could feel the internal struggle in the tension of his shoulders. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to retreat. She knew that this was the ultimate test, the one they had been preparing for, without even realizing it. It was one thing to love someone when everything was going smoothly, but it was in the difficult moments, the ones where everything seemed to be falling apart, that true love would be proven. Emily sat beside him one night, her hand gently brushing his. "James," she said softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I know this is hard. I know it feels like everything is falling apart, but we're not in this alone. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. I'm here. I believe in you. We'll get through this together." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "I don't know if I can keep this company afloat, Emily. I don't know if I can fix what's broken." "You don't have to do it alone," Emily replied. "We can figure this out together. I'm not going anywhere." Her words hit him like a lifeline, and for the first time in weeks, Emily saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. The storm outside hadn't passed, but in that moment they were in it together. The next few months were a blur of long hours, late-night meetings, and tense negotiations. James worked tirelessly to save his company, but the financial crisis wasn't something that could be solved overnight. The media continued to scrutinize his every move, but through it all, Emily stayed by his side. She became his rock, his confidant, his partner in every sense. She used her marketing expertise to help manage the company's public image, reaching out to old contacts and offering creative solutions. She gave him the emotional support he desperately needed, helping him stay grounded when it felt like everything around them was falling apart. Slowly but surely, they began to turn things around. James restructured his company, cutting costs and making difficult decisions that saved it from the brink of collapse. It wasn't easy, and there were days when both of them felt like giving up. But they didn't. They fought for each other, fought for their future. In the end, James's company emerged stronger, more resilient. It wasn't the same company it had been before, but it had been rebuilt, just like their relationship. Emily and James had proven to themselves that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about standing by each other when everything seemed hopeless, about facing the storm together and coming out the other side stronger. And when the dust finally settled, when the world stopped watching and the crisis was over, Emily and James stood together, their hearts united. They had passed the ultimate test not because they were perfect, but because they had chosen each other, time and time again, through the darkest moments. As James looked at Emily, his hand resting gently on hers, he knew one thing for certain: no matter what challenges lay ahead, they could face them together. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the news came, as ordinary as any other day, but destined to change everything. Emily had woken up early, the soft light of dawn creeping through the window and casting a warm golden hue across the bedroom. She stretched, feeling the weight of the last few months of work, of late nights spent with James, of shared struggles and triumphs. They had weathered the storm together, his company was back on solid ground, their lives were starting to feel balanced again. The future, for the first time in a long while, seemed within their grasp. James was still asleep beside her, his steady breathing soft and comforting. Emily smiled to herself, thinking about the journey they had taken, how, at every crossroads, they had chosen each other. She leaned over to kiss him gently on the cheek, savoring the peaceful moment, but as she moved back, something caught her attention. A sharp feeling, almost a pull, a flutter in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was nothing, perhaps just the remnants of a dream, or her body still adjusting to the early morning. But then, as she went to get out of bed, it happened again, faint but unmistakable. Her heart raced. It couldn't be. Not yet. She was only just beginning to adjust to the thought of her future with James, to the idea that everything had fallen into place. But now, there was a sudden sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet whisper telling her that something was about to change. The following days were a blur of small tests, fleeting thoughts, and moments of anxiety. Emily could hardly focus on anything else, the truth just barely out of her reach. She had always been careful about her health, always made sure to stay on top of things. But this was different. After a few more tests, the unmistakable truth settled in. She was pregnant, and not just with one baby, with two. Her heart beat faster as the weight of it all began to sink in. Twins. She and James, who had fought so hard to rebuild their lives and their relationship, were about to bring new life into the world, two tiny, perfect lives that would forever change the course of their story. The emotions came rushing in waves: shock, joy, fear, excitement. It was a moment that felt both surreal and beautifully real, all at once. The first person she called after a breathless moment of silence was James. He had been at a meeting, but when he picked up the phone, Emily could barely hold it together. She could hear his voice, full of warmth and concern, as he asked her if everything was okay. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling, I'm pregnant, with twins." For a long moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, a deep, joyous laugh. James's voice, filled with pure happiness, broke through the quiet. "Twins," he said, his voice almost a breathless whisper, as if he couldn't believe it. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Emily replied, a laugh of her own breaking free. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." In that instant, everything changed. The weight of the world, the obstacles they had faced, all seemed small compared to the miracle they were about to embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem daunting. It was bright, filled with possibility, and it was all waiting for them. As the weeks passed and Emily's pregnancy progressed, the joy that had been buried under layers of uncertainty and fear began to blossom. The couple had found a new rhythm, a new energy. Emily, though exhausted at times, reveled in the changes happening within her body. She marveled at how her relationship with James seemed to deepen even further as they navigated this new chapter of their lives. They would attend doctor's appointments together, hands entwined, sharing looks of wonder and awe when they saw the tiny, beating hearts on the ultrasound screen. They would laugh as they dreamed about their future as parents, imagining what their twins would be like. It was a time of growth, both for their family and for their love. James, too, seemed to glow with a new sense of purpose. His usual drive and ambition were still there, but now they were directed towards something greater than himself. He would often find moments to pause, to gently touch Emily's growing belly, as if he could feel the lives inside her already. His love for her, for the family they were building, seemed to take on a new dimension. The weight of the world had been replaced with the responsibility of parenthood, but there was no fear, only gratitude. He had come so far, from the man who had once been consumed by his past to the man who now stood beside Emily with unwavering support. As Emily looked at James during those moments, she felt a deep sense of connection to him. Their bond had already been strong, but now, as they prepared to welcome their children, it felt like their hearts were beating as one. They were no longer just two individuals who had come together through shared adversity. They were becoming a family, linked not just by love, but by the miracle of new life. The challenges that once seemed insurmountable, the crises, the mistakes, the setbacks, no longer mattered. They had proven, time and time again, that their love could withstand the hardest of storms. And now they were ready to build something new, something even more meaningful. There were, of course, moments of doubt. The pregnancy, while joyful, came with its own set of challenges. Emily often found herself overwhelmed by the changes in her body, the constant fatigue, and the new responsibilities looming ahead. She worried about being a good mother, about balancing her career with raising two children. But each time a doubt crept in, James was there holding her hand, supporting her in ways both big and small. He made sure to remind her that they were in this together, that they would figure it out, step by step. It was during one of these moments, as they sat on the couch one evening, Emily resting her head on his shoulder, that she realized how far they had come. Their relationship had been tested in so many ways, but now they were stronger than ever. They were building something together, not just for themselves, but for the children who would soon be a part of their world. "James," Emily said, her voice soft but filled with certainty, "I never imagined this life, not like this. I never imagined I'd be here with you, with everything we've been through." "I never imagined it either," James replied, his hand gently resting on her stomach. "But I'm so grateful. This is our miracle, Emily, and no matter what happens, we're going to be okay." In that moment, Emily knew that they were. They had proven time and time again that love, when it's rooted in partnership, resilience, and unwavering commitment, could overcome anything. And now, as they prepared to welcome their children into the world, she knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, and there would still be challenges to face. But Emily was ready. They were ready. Together, they would build a future that was full of love, laughter, and the kind of joy that only a family could bring. And with James by her side, she knew that nothing would ever feel impossible again. The miracle of life and the miracle of their love had already begun. The day had come, the day that had been months in the making, the day that would forever mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Emily had thought she knew what love felt like, but the moment she held her babies in her arms, she realized that love had depths she could never have imagined. The twins' two tiny, perfect little lives had arrived, changing everything. James had been by her side every step of the way, his presence unwavering, and now they both looked down at their children, their hearts overflowing with emotion. The labor had been long and difficult, as Emily had expected, but the moment she had heard their cries, their strong, clear voices that echoed through the sterile room, nothing else mattered. It was as if time had stopped, and all the pain, the exhaustion, the fears that had clung to her throughout the pregnancy melted away in an instant. She had done it. She and James had created life, together. Her firstborn, a boy with dark hair and a calm, serene expression, was named Elijah. His tiny hands curled around her finger as she whispered his name softly. Emily smiled through the tears that welled in her eyes. Elijah was the symbol of the love she had fought so hard to believe in, the love that had carried her through the darkest days and had brought her to this moment. Beside him, her daughter, Isabella, was everything Emily had dreamed of, her eyes wide and full of wonder, her small features already so familiar as though she had always been a part of them. James held Isabella, and the sight of him cradling their daughter so gently, his eyes bright with wonder, sent a rush of warmth through Emily's chest. This was everything. This was what it was all for. It wasn't just about overcoming the past or finding success. It was about love, the love that had gotten them to this point, the love that would sustain them through every moment to come. "Emily," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "we did it. They're here. Our family is complete." Emily looked at him, her heart full to the brim, and nodded. "We did. We really did." As the days passed and they settled into their new lives, Emily and James discovered a rhythm that felt natural and beautiful. The twins, though demanding, brought them closer than ever. Every little giggle, every tiny hand reaching for them, was a reminder of the miracle they had created together. They took turns rocking the babies to sleep, often falling asleep themselves in the middle of their nightly routines, tired but content. Their lives were filled with the soft sounds of newborn cries and the warmth of shared laughter. There were challenges, of course, the sleepless nights, the early mornings, the never-ending cycle of feeding and changing diapers, but none of it felt like a burden. It felt like a blessing. Emily had been nervous at first, unsure of what kind of mother she would be. She had spent so many years working on her career, building her life in New York, that the idea of being a mother felt both exciting and overwhelming. But in the days that followed the birth, she realized just how natural it felt. She watched James with the babies, how tender and patient he was, and it reassured her. Together, they were a team. Together, they could handle anything. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where love was nurtured in every corner. The walls were filled with laughter, the air thick with the scent of baby lotion and soft blankets. It was the life Emily had never dared to imagine, yet it felt so right, so deeply fulfilling. The world outside moved on, but for Emily and James, their little family was all that mattered. They had weathered storms, some of them far more difficult than they had ever anticipated, and they had come out on the other side stronger, more connected, and more in love than ever. There was no more room for doubt, no more room for fear. They had built this life together, and nothing would ever break it apart. Then, just as they were beginning to settle into their new normal, an unexpected message arrived. Emily had just finished feeding Elijah, her fingers still gently cradling his tiny head, when her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She reached for it absent-mindedly, thinking it was just a reminder or a message from one of her colleagues. But when she saw the name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was Tom. She hadn't heard from him in months, not since he had disappeared from her life, leaving behind nothing but hurt and confusion. The message was short, but its impact was immediate. Emily, I hope you're well. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I owe you an apology. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, for not seeing what I had until it was too late. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. You'll always have my best wishes. Emily sat there for a moment, the phone in her hand, unsure of how to respond. A part of her wanted to reach out, to ask him why now, why after all this time. But then she looked at James, who was cradling Isabella in his arms, his gaze focused on her, and everything became clear. She had already found the happiness she had been searching for. She had already found the love that had been missing from her life. The apology from Tom was a reflection of his own growth, of his recognition of the mistakes he had made, but it no longer had any power over her. She had long ago made peace with the past. It was James and their children who had filled the spaces that Tom had left behind, and she was more than content. With a deep breath, Emily typed a simple reply. Thank you, Tom. I hope you find what you're looking for too. She set the phone down, turned to James, and smiled, knowing in that moment that she had finally come home. The months passed in a blur of joy. Their family grew closer, stronger. Emily and James reveled in the everyday moments of parenthood, the first smiles, the first steps, the first words. Every milestone felt like a triumph, a testament to the love they had built, to the resilience they had shown in the face of so much adversity. And one night, as they sat together, the twins asleep in their cribs, Emily reflected on everything that had brought them to this point. She had spent so much of her life searching for love, for purpose, for a sense of belonging. She had been through heartbreak, uncertainty, and challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. But now, as she looked at her children and her husband, she realized that she had found it all not in the grand gestures or the perfect moments, but in the quiet, everyday life they had created together. James, she whispered, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the moonlight filter through the window. We made it. We really did. James kissed her forehead, his voice full of quiet pride. We did, Em, and it's only just beginning. The journey that had started with so many doubts, with so much pain, had brought them to this perfect, peaceful place. The happy ending wasn't just a moment. It was the life they had built together. A life full of love, resilience, and the unshakable bond of family. Emily knew that no matter what the future held, as long as they were together, they could face anything. This, she realized, was the true meaning of happiness. After all the trials, tribulations, and shocks, she finally found true happiness. Not from a perfect love, but from resilience, self-belief, and the ability to open up to love again. Life isn't always easy, but when we learn to get back up, great things happen. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more emotional and surprising stories in the future. Thank you for watching.